Today we shall discuss some more basic concepts of macroeconomics, and so these are the things mentioned in your syllabus. That is circular flow of income, then aggregate demand in an economy, and then components of aggregate demand, then aggregate supply in an economy, and components of aggregate supply. So, okay, probably you might have studied all these things in the past. Probably in your engineering courses, some things might have been discussed. But no, since you suggested me in the last lecture that we should continue with the syllabus, we shall go ahead with this syllabus. Now, so we shall start with the circular flow of income. And when you say circular flow of income, we should also discuss why we should know the circular flow of income. And see, when we discuss any macroeconomic policy, if we do not have a very clear idea of how things are interconnected, then whenever we take up any policy measure in any sector, then we will not be sure how it is going to affect. Okay, so that's why in that context, I think we should discuss the circular flow of income, how different sectors are interlinked, and so we shall start with the simple model, and we shall start with two sector model, where we have only household sector and the farm sector. And if you look at these two sectors and how these are related, then we see that okay, household has individuals, or say the manpower, you can say, and so we can sell our labor. Okay? We'll sell labor to whom? We can sell labor to the farm, because farm is basically producing. Farm is a producing unit, and household is a consuming unit. Household also can become a producing unit if, say for example, you just use your own labor and produce certain things. So every individual can again become a producer and consumer. But here we are assuming that household is supplying labor and consuming the goods that is produced by the farms. On the other hand, farm, which produces the output, it could be goods or services, it takes the inputs from the household. Basically, it uses the labor from the household sector, and it can process other factors of production that we had discussed in last lecture, that land, labor, capital, organization. So organization is basically the farm here, and then it processes all the land and labor, and then it uses its own capital, and then that's how it produces output. So what do we see? Then we see the black arrow bar, that household is selling the factors of production, and it could be labor, it could be other factors of production, but simplistically we assume that it sells labor, and then it can also give the land for rent, and similarly if it invests as a shareholder, then it will get dividends. So it can give different factors of production to the farm, and so in return farms will pay wages and rent and dividends to the household. So that is one way relationship, that household is selling factors of production and farms are giving wages, rents and dividends to the household in return. On the other hand, we see that the farm, whatever it is producing, it will sell all those goods and services to the households. Basically, households are consuming units, and that's why they will buy all the goods and services produced by the farms. So that's another black arrow we see in the upper part. So that is goods and services sold by the farm to the households, and then households are selling. Households are buying commodities, so that's how their income is going to the farms. Now, so we can see that farms, okay, the household is selling the factors of production and buying the goods and commodities. So one circle is complete. Okay? And then another circle will be that the farm is giving wage, rent and dividends. So there is a outflow of the money from the farms to the household. Now that money is coming back to the farm in terms of the consumption expenditure of the household, because household will not keep the money that it is earning. Okay, if you are only a miser, you will be earning income, you will be earning dividend, you will be earning rent, but you will not be spending anything. But that is very unlikely. So most of the part of your income you will be spending in different ways. But here remember, in this two sector model, we are assuming that all the income of the household is consumed. There is no saving here. Okay, so that is a very simplistic assumption that we take, which is not true. Yeah, but no, just to explain the circular relationship, we are taking that assumption that household is consuming everything, so that this circular flow is continuing. Whatever wage, rent, and dividend it is getting from the farm, it is spending all that money on the consumption expenditure. Okay, and no, otherwise what will happen? The farm's uh, income flow will decline. In fact, so we can, since we are discussing, it's not actually macroeconomics class, we should know actually the macroeconomic policy. In fact, if you are aware of an economist named Schumpeter, or similarly, if you are aware of the economist like Marx, so they talk about creative destruction. Okay? That see, the farm always innovates, and when the farm innovates, it will it will use the capital and it will reduce the use of the labor. And so what happens now, the farm gets more profit, because when you are using capital, your profit basically increases. And now you are using less labor. So what happens, the wage flow from farm to household will decline, and the dividend which should be distributed to the household, that also doesn't happen, because nowadays you will see most of the farms are very big and they own maximum percentage of the share. So that means very rich people own the share of all the companies, and that's how they get most of the dividend. So that now what happens? The flow of income from the farm to the household reduces, because wage flow is not happening because you are using less labor. And I have probably told you in the first class that nowadays, if you do the analysis, the rise in the wage and the rise in the profit, then the rise in the real wage is very low. Okay, and in fact, we can take the example of the minimum wage rate in our country. At what rate the minimum wage rate increases, and if you look at the salary of the white collar job holders, or you can look at the government employees, or you can look at the private sector CEOs, at what rate their salary is increasing, then there is a huge difference. Similarly, the profit earned by the companies, you read in newspapers that in this quarter, the say some company has witnessed 200% profit growth. Okay, so we read that kind of news in the media, but when it comes to the wage growth, that is very slow. So what happens? So I will explain the concept of creative destruction. When the firm is innovating and using more and more technology, then it gives less wage to the household. And similarly, it also transfers less dividend to the household. And in fact, now rent also is not flowing to the household, because now the firm is also owning most of the land. There is a concentration of the land, and in fact, if you find in the government, say when the government signs memorandum of understanding, it gets the private companies get free land, and these are all rent free, and the lease rate is very low, and so that's how. And we also give them tax free tax holiday for a couple of years, and so that's how the companies do not pay rent to anybody. The lease rate is very low, dividend flow is also declining, and wages are also declining. Then what happens? When the households get less income, then the aggregate demand in the economy will collapse. Okay, because if people do not have income, and maximum people do not have income, then what happens? The aggregate demand in the market will collapse. So that aggregate demand concept, and we shall discuss later. But for your information, I'm telling, when the income of the household falls, the aggregate demand in the economy will collapse. Now, whatever the farm produces will not be demanded, okay, by the household. So then what happens? Then the farm will collapse. And in fact, that leads to the business cycle. That you see that for certain years the growth rate is very high, and then after a few years again we see that growth rate falls. That could be the reason. And in fact, you can link it to our real life. If you look around Bhubaneswar city itself, you see different constructions companies have built so many residential complex, and you see that many of them are not sold. Of course, good apartments are sold out, but many houses are not sold out. Because why it happens? Because when there is a boom, every construction company believes, or any real estate business person believes, that if whatever I produce and sell, that will be demanded in the market, and that's how they end up in overproducing anything. Here in this case, it is the apartments. So you will observe that these apartments are not being sold. Similarly, in the farm, when they are producing certain goods and services, and they are using more and more capital, then we see that, and they are not transferring income to the household, then the aggregate demand collapses, and that's how the farms cannot sell their product, and that's how that will lead to a recession and slowdown in the economic growth. So that is when it is very important. It is very much important to understand the circular relationship between the household and the farm. So that is a two-sector model, and we assume that there is no saving by the household. Now we can bring in the third sector, that is government. So other than the household and the firm, government also is playing important role. Okay? And here now we can see the relationship, that what happens when the household farm, the same relationship exists, that the household sells the factors of production, in return it gets wage, dividend, interest, profit, and rents. And then similarly, the household purchases goods and services, and then the farm is getting all that income. So that is a relationship that we have already discussed between farm and household, and then government sector is added. Now, what is the responsibility of the government? The responsibility of the government is basically okay. In fact, I think we should have a special lecture on this, the role of the government. Okay? Although I don't know, I don't think that this is there in the syllabus, but okay, very quickly I can tell you what is the role of a government. In economics, I always teach the role of the government in the past class itself. Okay, let me tell you very quickly what are the roles of the government. If you look at the classical roles of the government, then government had only three roles. Okay? Basically, the classical economists believed that government should play the minimalist role. It should not do much of things. Now, what are those minimal roles? The first thing is protection of the nation from external aggression. That is the first function of the government. And second is law and order, okay, of the within the country. So first we are protecting the boundary. That is first function. That is defense service, and you are protecting the people from the external aggression. And second function is maintenance of law and order within the country. And then third one is respecting property rights, and that is very important. Property right means suppose if you have a piece of land and somebody encroaches upon it, and then you can go to a court, okay, and that's how you solve the litigation. But if the nation does not respect that, then somebody will encroach your land. Then what is the impact? Then if somebody encroaches upon your land, you will not do any kind of investment on your land, because if you are not sure whether you can enjoy that land, then you will not do any kind of investment. So it is for the growth of any country. Respecting property right is important. That also includes the intellectual property right. It's not only referring to the land and building, it also refers to the intellectual property. If you have invented something, if you have got a patent, you should be able to sell that patent to somebody else, or you can give this license to somebody else to use that license, and in return you can get royalty. So those are coming under the property right. And these are the classical functions of the government. So classical economists believe that government should do only this much, nothing more, nothing less. But over time, we see that the government has been accumulating much more powers. And in fact, if you go back in the history, then in the 1929, when the Great Depression happened, then a new function was added to the government, and that function is stabilization function. In 1929, what happened? There was a Great Depression. You might be reading in newspaper. There was a Great Depression in the USA and UK, and then we observed that people lost job, people did not get income, they did not get food to eat. Many people, were dying in starvation. So that was the situation in America, and then economists could not recognize the problem. It took long time to recognize the problem, and then the economist hero, who came, that is John Maynard Keynes. He basically said that, during such a time, government will have to do the investment, and then only the recession phase will be ending, and market can again revive. So that's how the American president brought New Deal, and in that New Deal, basically it was called as prompt priming. That means the government should invest a lot of money, and it doesn't matter where you invest, money should go to the people. And if money goes to the people, people will start going to market, and then when people go to market, then there will be demand for the products, and then industries will start their production. So that was a recommendation given by John Maynard Keynes. So then when you say stabilization function, that means economies will fluctuate. That means output of the economy will fluctuate, and that's how we need to stabilize that output. So within stabilization, we have three functions. One is stabilization of the output. That means GDP fluctuation should be minimal. That is first one. And the second one is stabilization in the prices. Inflation and deflation, you cannot have a very highly volatile price. So it has to be stabilized. And then third one is stabilization in the employment. If sometimes you have more employment or full employment, sometimes you have mass unemployment, then that will be again a problematic situation. So stabilization function was added. Now within stabilization function, we have stabilization of output, stabilization of prices, and stabilization of employment. Then when the Second World War happened, so I'm talking about the stabilization function just after the First World War, and then during Second World War, we saw that many countries, started their reconstruction activities, and so that also is added to the role of the government. That reconstruction is also the responsibility of the government. If due to any region, there is a need for reconstruction of certain activities, then government has to take it over. And then the Marxian idea also was getting popularity, and the concept of welfare nation was getting popularity during 1950s, and that's how most of the nation states were getting more responsibilities in their hand, and that's how the redistribution function was added. And that is basically a Marxian idea. The Marxian idea was getting popularity, and that's how the redistribution function was added. And redistribution, what is the requirement? That you have to tax the rich people, and you have to transfer those benefits to the poor people who are not getting the benefits. At least because a welfare nation has to ensure the basic necessities of every citizen. No person in a country welfare nation should go hungry, and should not die anybody without the food. Similarly, the basic healthcare facilities, basic education, these are the things that government has to provide. So these are basically the redistribution objective, because see, education can also be provided by the market, healthcare can also be provided by the market, but if you allow the market to operate only in these fields, then market will provide these goods only to a few people. Imagine if only 20% people in this country will be vaccinated, then what will happen? Even if you are vaccinated, that will not have any impact, because if other people are not vaccinated, then that disease will come back. So that's how polio advertisement you see Amitabh Bachchan. That now India is polio free, but people from other countries are coming to our country. Similarly, if the newborn babies are not vaccinated, then they will have polio, and then everyone will be affected. So that is when, even if your child is vaccinated, you have to continue this vaccination to everyone. So, and that's why these are called as public goods or merit goods. So that's how that's how the role of government has evolved. Okay? And we see past three functions: defense, law and order, and respecting the proper right. Then the stabilization function was added, in which you have stabilization of output, stabilization of prices, stabilization of employment. Then we have added the reconstruction activities. Then we have added the redistribution activities, and that's how we are imposing taxes and the benefits. In fact, I should also tell you the story behind this government. In fact, there is an interesting article written by an economist called Mansoor Alsan. Somebody can search in internet. He has given a very beautiful story on the government, the evolution of the government, how it has evolved and how it has accumulated more powers. In fact, he gives a story that just go back to the Stone Age, and then we come back to say settled agriculture. So when people started doing the agriculture and started living near the bank of the river, and they started doing agriculture. See that time there was no such law and order. Okay, and then the people who are very powerful, they would loot others' property. So the honest people or the innocent people would be doing agriculture, but then people who are very powerful will be going to the others' agriculture field and looting the crop, and that's how they survived with that, with only looting crop from others' agricultural land. And so that is called as roving bandit. So there are so many bandits, and they used to loot property from others' agricultural land or crop from agricultural land, and that's how the net benefit is very low, because so many people are doing agriculture, but there are also so many people who are looting crop. Now the people who are doing agriculture and who are innocent, they were quite disturbed, and so now one bandit once comes to a settlement and makes a deal that, you see, now okay, I used to steal your property or crop, but now I will not steal your crop, but and I will also ensure that other bandits do not loot crop from your land. So I will safeguard your land and I will safeguard your crop, so that you get an ensured amount of harvest, because otherwise people loot your crop, so you get very minimal amount of crop. So I will now safeguard and you get ensured amount of crop, but in return you will have to give me some amount of your crop. Suppose if you are getting to 10 quintal of rice or paddy, then if I do not protect, you will be getting only 50 quintal or less than 50 quintal, because others will be looting your crop. But if I protect your crop, you will get 100 quintal. So out of that 100 quintal, if you give me 10 quintal, everyone in the settlement gives me 10 quintal, then I am happy. I will also get some 10 quintal or more than that, and I will protect your crop, and you also benefit out of this. And people thought, oh yeah, it's a good deal, and it makes sense. And that's how they started. So the roving bandit becomes a settled bandit. So that settled bandit now is not moving from one place to other to loot crop of people. Now he settled down in a settlement and has made a deal with the people. So he's protecting the crop, and in return, at the end of the harvest season, he is getting a percentage of the harvest, and that's how now people thought that okay, this is a good deal, and so the roving bandit becomes a settled bandit, and everyone is benefiting out of this. Now, as again time evolves, we see that now there was fighting among the people, and because families expand, and then so they also fight among themselves. Now the people go to the bandit, to take help. They see that he's fighting with me, so I don't go interfere. Now he also gets into all those activities. Okay? So that's how the bandits' power now is increasing, only from protecting the crop to settling the disputes among the households. Okay? So that is basically the story of the government. The government starts with very minimal functions, but with time we see that government acquires more and more responsibilities, and that's how we see now government is involved in everything: disaster management, providing pension to people. So that's how government, you can see so many power responsibilities are now being added to the government. Now today I was reading somewhere in a newspaper that now the government of Assam is going to give one scooty to some 20,000 girls who are going to college and who have got a first class. And so these are basically the addition that is happening. Some government is giving television sets, some government is giving laptops, Okay, so many responsibilities are coming up. So that's how now we see that now government is imposing taxes. So tax is the deal, that the bandit had done a deal with the people that you have to give me 10% of your crop. Not just like that. No, we have a fixed rate of income tax and corporate income tax or consumer indirect taxes. So that we are paying, and in return, what is government doing? Now government is giving the social transfers. So in social transfers, it includes everything. So it includes the old age pension, it includes the healthcare, it includes the education that we're getting, it includes the infrastructure that we're getting, so that household gets. Similarly, the farm also pays a tax to the government, and in return, the government purchases the commodities produced by the farm, and then government also provides a lot of other facilities like infrastructure, electricity, water to the farms. Okay, so that's how the circular relationship continues between the household, the government, and the farm, and those relation between household farm also continues. So that is the two sector model. Sorry, this is three sector model where we have added the government to the household and the farms. Then comes the fourth sector model, in which we are adding the external economy. Remember, in the first two models, in two sector model and three sector model, we assume also that this is a closed economy. We are not doing any kind of trade with other countries. So that is the assumption in the first one and two models. And now in the third model, where we have four sectors, we are now adding the external sector, that the economy is trading with other countries, and that's how we get exports and imports. So from exports, the farms can export and the household can also export, but here we are assuming that no, households are importing from the foreign countries, and the farms are exporting to the other countries. But happen that farms can export and import, households can export and import. So from export we earn income, and from to do the import we have to make the payments. So that's how we have added the third sector. And in fact, the role of the government can also be added, although in circular, in arrow mark we have not shown, but government's role can also come to regulate the export and import. And because we see from time to time the government imposes sometimes some penalty, or so you can tariff, and government imposes quantitative restrictions, and that means you can import these items, you cannot import those goods from other countries. In fact, and if you look at the trade policy of India, we have seen a major change, from 1950 to 2020. If you see, there is a sea change that can be observed. That how we had quantitative restrictions, how we had moved from quantitative restriction or non-tariff barriers to the tariff barriers when we joined the WTO, and when we adopted the new economic policy. So that responsibility can be added. The government also regulates the export and import, because depending upon the availability of our foreign exchange, we have to allow the export and import. Although now we do not have such restrictions, but there is still some restriction. If you are aware of the balance of payment, where we have a current account and the capital account, we have relaxed the regulations in case of the current account, but in case of capital account, there are a lot of regulations still continuing. So, and whether it is good or bad, if you ask me, then some people say that regulation over capital account is always a good thing. And since India has good regulation over the capital account, we are saved from the major fluctuations. Like whenever there is a global economic crisis, India is not badly affected because we have a regulation over the capital account. But in current account, after 1991 reform, we have liberalized the current account. So yes, so government controls the export and import, then households do export and import, farms do export and import. Through export, you earn income, and for importing, you have to use that foreign exchange to make the payments of the import. So that is a four sector model. Now, in the five sector model, we are adding basically the financial sector, which we had not included in any other model. And why the finance sector is very much important. Remember, in the first model, I told you that we assume that the households do not save anything; they consume everything. But that is not real. In reality, we see that the households do a lot of saving. In fact, if you look at the saving of this country, then the maximum percentage is contributed by the household sector. Of course, the companies also do contribute a significant amount. So basically, the savings comes from three sectors: household, then we have farms, and the government also has a lot of savings. Okay, and in fact, the government of Odisha also has a lot of savings in Reserve Bank. So most of the states and the government of India, they have saving. Public sector undertakings have savings. So these are the sources of saving, and now what is added here? Now that saving goes to the financial sector, and then financial sector does this business. Now it takes money from the households. Whoever has surplus money, the financial sector will take, and in return, we will get the rate of interest on our savings. And similarly, the people who are in need of the money, they come to the financial sector, the banking bank. So financial sector basically includes the capital market as well as financial market. And if you ask me the difference between the capital market and the financial market, then capital market deals with the long-term investments, and the financial sector deals with the short-term transactions. So all our banking sector will be basically called as the financial sector, or say money market, you can say. And capital market is basically referring to the stock exchange, where we do the long-term investments. So now whoever is in need of the money, they will come to the financial sector and they will take money. And so banks will basically charge a rate of interest, and you know that the rate of interest charged on the investment is higher than the rate of interest given to the people who do the saving. And so the rest amount is basically so the difference between the rate of saving and the rate of investment would be with the profit, or you can say the operational cost of the financial sector. If you look at India's financial sector, now see the rate of interest have gone down significantly. If you compare the past, the rate of interest, particularly on housing loan or car loan, used to be, or in a personal loan, used to be 15 percentage, more than 10 percentage. Now, if you look at the housing loan in the present context, now it has come down to 7.5 percentage. Similarly, the rate of return that we got on our savings have also come down. Earlier, if you had a saving, probably when we were very young, the savings, if you did a fixed deposit, that used to get double in 5 years. Now that is not happening, because the rate of interest has gone down, and that's how now to make your savings double, basically fixed deposit double, it takes more than 7 to 8 years. So why this is happening? In fact, this is a good sign only. When the rate of interest falls, that is a sign of the development of the banking sector. Because of the higher efficiency, the banks are able to provide loans at lower rate of interest. But when there is gross inefficiency in the banking sector or the financial sector, they will have to charge high rate of interest from the investors who are doing investment. And that will again add to the problem, because if your rate of interest is high, then people will not do any kind of investment. And so that was also the situation in India. The private investment in India was very, very low because rate of interest was very high. Then we did not have the concept of housing loans or the car loans, and similarly loans for the consumer durables. Now all that is happening because increasing the efficiency in the banking sector and financial sector. Now many people are now trying to invest their money in the capital market through mutual funds, through direct purchase of the shares. So that's how finance sector in India has developed, and so the intermediation cost of the financial sector has gone down, and that is reflected in on the lower rate of interest on the savings and lower rate of interest on our investment. So that's how this is a 5-sector model where we have households, we have firms, we have the government, we have the international sector, we have also the financial sector. So that's how, and everything is yes.
What
Go
are the
ahead.
leakages and injections you have
Yes, sir.
mentioned
Sir,
in
this is
this
Praveen.
PPT?
Yeah, here actually, okay, leakages and injections, basically these are taxes. Tax is considered as a leakage. And injections are basically the transfers that we are getting. In the previous diagram, I had shown you the taxes. So taxes are always a leakage. You are earning so much of money, and in fact, many people, particularly the salary class, they always complain that we are earning, we are putting so much of hard work, we are earning this much income, and government is taking away all the money. In fact, when your salary increases, you will believe, you will get to know that as you earn more and more money, the real income that is coming to you will be not very high, because you will be moving from the uh, tax, from a lower tax slab to a higher tax slab. And government is nowadays imposing different sales, surcharge, and if you are doing all honest online transactions, you pay tax everywhere. So that's how the honest people feel that government is doing so many leakages from us. And but the people who are not coming in the formal sector, they don't have any leakage. They get all black money and they don't pay any tax. So the leakage is basically the tax, okay, that we pay to the government. So our the real income actually is lower than the nominal income that we are earning. We might be earning 1.5 lakh per month, but then the real income is only 1 lakh rupees, because of the high amount of tax that you have to pay when you go for a higher income bracket. Injection is you are getting the social benefits. See, the poor people get a lot of social benefits, even the rich people. In fact, there is always a wrong notion that the poor people get maximum transfers from the government. It is really wrong, because in fact the rich people get the maximum subsidy from the government, because it is the rich people who only get the higher education. It is the rich people who enjoy the public goods in more quantity than the poor people. See, the poor people do not send their kids to the government medical colleges. They do not send their kids to the IITs, and these are the sectors. Even the higher education. So higher education is subsidized to the maximum amount, and it is only the rich people who get benefits. But nobody talks about that. We only talk about the people who get 500 rupees per month. We say that no, you are getting 500 rupees, you are getting 1 rupee rice. That's why you are not doing anything. So many kind of controversial statements come up, but everyone gets benefits from the government in different ways. Poor people do not use the airports, and airports are used by the rich people, and those airports are developed by the government of India. Similarly, national highways, you will drive a car. Poor people do not drive a car on the national highways, so we enjoy the six laning of the national highways the most. The rich people, they will have to travel in the same bus only, and they don't enjoy those national highways or properties actually in large quantity. Okay, so that is basically the leakage and the injection. So that is all about the circular flow of income. We started with 2 sector, 3 sector, 4 sector, and 5 sector. Now we'll move to the aggregate demand and aggregate supply things. So we'll start with the aggregate demand in an economy. Now I will ask you this question: what is demand? Can somebody explain what is demand? Just tell me. No, you all have studied this, and every day we use this concept, and I have been telling. So I will not. So the economic student will not have to answer this question, because there is one person who has MA in economics. Now I am asking all other officers. Please tell me, what do you mean by demand? Let me hear from something from you. Can somebody tell what is demand? Now please volunteer.
For the needs of the population.
Needs of the population. Okay. Any other answer?
Sir, we can define demand as a amount of things that consumer need.
Okay. Okay. Any other answer? Don't do Google search. Okay. If you do Google search, you'll get everything, and you are all online, so that you can always do. But no, just use your mind and tell me. What do you perceive when somebody tells that demand? And I've been telling very frequently that demand is now lower, and to increase the demand, government has to do investment. No, yeah, somebody is telling.
Sir, yeah, so it's the likeliness or the interest of people to buy things.
Okay, likingness or interest of the people. Okay. In fact, when we all studied in schools, when our English teacher used to teach us grammar, he used to tell this: if wishes were horses, beggars should ride them. Okay? You all have studied this in English grammar. If wishes were horses, beggars should ride them. So why I'm telling this? We have so many desires, okay? And we cannot fulfill all these desires. Okay? And that's why these wishes are not demands. And our whatever we wish, we cannot fulfill. I think all of us would be happy to get a chartered aeroplane, isn't it? Just like Mukesh Ambani has. Every one
Yes,
of
sir.
us would like to have a building like Antilla, okay, that Mukesh Ambani's house, where we can directly land on our rooftop, okay, with our chartered aeroplane, okay, or helicopter. So everyone has that wish, but that is not our demand. Okay, so demand is
Excuse
something
me,
else.
sir. Excuse me,
Yes,
sir.
yeah,
Sir, demand can be related to someone's ability to purchase.
yes, exactly. That is true. So now we are now bringing economics here. That when we say demand, we have basically three components. Okay, that okay, we have a desire to have something, and we have a lot of desires. If you close your eyes, we'll have hundreds of desires. Okay, and but the desire should be backed by two things. You should have the willingness to pay. Okay, because there are also misers who have the ability to pay, but they don't will to pay. Okay? Just like I was telling that no, I don't will to pay brinjal if the price exceeds 60 rupees or 50 rupees. Similarly, if the price of onion exceeds 40 rupees, I don't have any willingness to pay for onion. Okay, so that means I do not have demand for certain products if the price exceeds certain limit. So we should have first the desire, and that should be backed by the willingness to pay, and we should also have the ability to pay. Then only it will be called as a demand. Okay, so simply desire is not a demand. Okay, and so that's how economists complicate things. Okay, they tell that okay, it's desire, you should have the willingness to pay, and you should also have the ability to pay, then only it is called as a demand. Now, all of you might have studied a little bit of economics because you are all engineering students. Many of you are engineers, and in engineering, these are taught in managerial economics, the demand function, and then supply function, then the equilibrium, prices, all those things you might have studied. But those are in a microeconomics context. But here we are going to discuss the aggregate demand. Now, okay, I'll tell you, the difference between the individual demand and the market demand. Okay, here I have not plotted the diagram, but I can tell you that when we say demand, uh, and it is basically backed by the demand is basically willingness to pay, desire backed by willingness to pay and ability to pay, that is demand. And demand is basically a function of so many other things like your income, then the price of the commodity, then the price of the related goods. Those are basically the individual commodity demand. When you are going to market, you are buying certain product, you look at the price, okay, and you look at the price of the related goods. So for example, when you go to market, what we do, we usually compare the vegetable prices, okay, and we buy only certain vegetables. We do not buy all the vegetables. Okay? So for example, in the off season, the cauliflower prices are a little higher. Okay, somebody who is really fond of cauliflower will be buying throughout the year. But there are people like me, who do proper economic analysis. No, I only buy cauliflower and say parval, potola modiya as you call it, only when the prices go down. Okay? And I don't buy those things in the off season. Okay, because I have to pay a very high price. And I buy the seasonal vegetables always. Okay? And why? Because the seasonal vegetables will have the least prices. Okay? And you also get a variety of vegetables because if you buy the seasonal things, so diversity comes. In winter, you get different vegetables. In summer, you get different vegetables, and you can save your budget money also. So that's why I told that when you are demanding certain products or when you are discussing the demand for one particular product, you are looking at the price of that product you are also looking at the prices of the related products. Okay, and then your income. So, for example, when the prices of gold increases and your salary does not increase in that proportion, even if your wife demands for a diamond set or for any kind of jewelry, you can't really do all those things. You cannot fulfill all those demands. You have to say that you have to give different excuses that no, wait, next year we'll buy. And because the gold prices are very high, so your income actually affects the demand for gold. And if your income is very high, you will be very generous to your wife that okay, let us buy gold, and you can gift your wife anytime, anything. Similarly, if you are a super rich person, you can gift your parents also a car. In films we see that people gift cars, diamond sets, and all that. We only think that can we really do all these things, because we are not that rich actually to give such kind of gifts, very luxurious gifts. So anyway, so what I was telling is that for individual commodities, when we discuss the demand, we look at the price of the specific product, we look at the price of the related products, we look at the income, we also look at the expectation in the future. What is going to happen in the future? You know that during cyclones, whenever one warning is issued, everyone runs to the market, and by the time everyone reach market, potato prices have gone up from 20 rupees to 30 rupees, from 30 to 40 rupees, and many products are not available in the market. So expectation also matters quite a lot. If somebody will give you information that these products prices are going to be much higher in the coming week, you will all run to market now, canceling the class. And they will think that class is not important, let me save some money by purchasing this product. So expectation also matters quite a lot. But in case of aggregate demand, it is completely different. You can say that you just sum up the demands, individual demands, to get the aggregate demand. Okay? But I have told you in the last class that summation of micro is not macro, right? Because there is a fallacy of composition. So summation of micro is not equal to macro. And that is why the aggregate demand is little different. And now in aggregate demand, what all things are there? We have, I have written the function here, that is aggregate demand is equal to C plus I plus G plus NX, where C is equal to consumer spending on the goods and services, and then I is equal to the private investment. So we can say the C is the consumption demand, I is investment demand, G is the government demand, okay, that is our government spending, and NX is the net demand from the other countries. That is basically the net export. That is export minus import. So when we are talking about the demand, aggregate demand, more or less it refers to the GDP. Okay? Whatever is produced in the country, that is demanded, and that's why we say that there is an equilibrium. Otherwise, the production will not happen. Of course, I have also told the business cycle that sometimes there is a glut in the market. Glut means you have produced too much of quantity in the market, but that is not demanded in the market. And I have also explained why the demand collapses. If the income flow from the farm to the households decline, then the aggregate demand in the market will also collapse. So, but demand can come from different sources. Consumption demand, it could be investment demand, it could be government demand or government expenditure, and it could be the net export, that is export minus import. Okay, so aggregate demand actually in macroeconomics includes these things. Now we shall discuss every component. Now, what are the factors?
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Last year, there was a shortfall in the car consumption because
Yes.
because that consumer spending on goods and services were less, I guess.
Yes.
But
Okay.
all
Why?
other
So
sectors were, yeah.
okay, your question is why the demand for the cars were low, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes. In fact, this is a very big question. In fact, I remember in my class, I had one class for this, why the demand for the cars was lower. And now also, and now this Corona lockdown, it's a very different situation. So the demand is already low. But before the lockdown also, the demand for the car sale was very, very low. And the reasons are many. I'm going to explain that. So one is that there was a fear that now the people in this country are having less income. Okay? So the income is declining, and that's how the demand for car is not increasing. That is one reason. So if people do, and that reason people also link it to the pay hike in different sectors, particularly when the 7th pay commission recommendations are implemented. The 7th pay commission implementation was, people took it as a joke that everyone expected a mutton biryani, but then they got it a kawa biryani. In that kind of jokes we all saw in Facebook post. And so 7th pay commission was not really a big high compared to the 6th pay commission. So that is one reason that in the government sector, the pay hike was not that much. Now in the corporate sector, the pay hikes were also quite low. Why? Because if you again remember the index of industrial production, those were also quite low. That means industry sector in India was also not experiencing a very fast growth. In fact, there was a slowdown and there was a fall in the industrial output in certain quarters. So that means if in the private sector there is also a slowdown, that means the private salaried class people are also not getting income. So then that demand is also now going down. Now there is another factor also responsible for the slowdown in the demand for the cars, the automobile sector. That was change in the technology. Now people are believing that now car industry is going to change the technology, and government's and regulation is also going to be stricter in the pollution norms, because now you see the most of the companies are moving from diesel petrol to electric cars. Okay, and now electric scooties are getting popular, and electric cars are also now going to be popular very soon, because now government is thinking to reduce the pollution emission in this country. And when you also move to electric cars, you can also save a lot of money, because your variable cost will be very, very low. You just charge your car and then you go. And the technology in electric car is also now improving quite a lot. So now people's faith for the electric automobiles is now increasing, be it two-wheelers, be it three-wheelers, four-wheelers. People are now, in fact, now different companies are coming up with new technology like solar cars. So you don't have to charge anywhere, just you have a solar plate and you run your car. Okay? And in India, we have a lot of sunlight. Okay? Throughout the year, only in summer season, in rainy season it is a little less, but then still you can get some sunshine, and that's how our energy efficiency is increasing in solar energy system. That's how. So these are technological changes that is happening, and then the demand that was falling from different sectors. So that was the reason behind a slowdown in the car sales. But there's a positive side of the reduction in the car sales also. That means if the people are now buying less cars, then the impact is that pollution emission is declining. Okay, and in fact, if you are again following different countries, the debates on the environmental pollution emission, now the advanced countries are now thinking to basically strengthen their public transport system. Now remember, suppose I am living in Jatni. Okay, and Khordha, Niger is located in Jatni, and I am staying in Niger campus. Now, suppose I will get, the government will announce that the public transport system between Khordha and Bhubaneswar, or Jatni and Bhubaneswar, is so good. Now there are good buses running, and on time, every 5 minutes you will get a bus, you get a seat, in the car, in the bus, and suppose the buses are all air conditioned, and there are people who will be willing to pay also for that. Okay? Then many people would prefer a public transport system, right? Because you can save a lot of your money. Because why you use a car? Because it gives you convenient. Anytime, whenever you want to go to your office, the buses are not available. You have to wait for half an hour, and you will not get a seat in the bus. That's why you are not preferring to use the public transport. But if the public transport system will improve significantly, all of us probably would prefer to move towards public transport. And in many advanced countries, now they're focusing on such kind of models. In fact, many countries have, I think a few countries have also made the public transport completely free. You just go and get into any bus, and it's all free. And why do government in those countries basically provide free public transport system? Because it will significantly reduce the pollution emission. Okay, and pollution emission has a huge indirect cost on the people. Now imagine in Delhi, just to live, people will have to buy so many defensive equipments just to survive. Now I have discussed that in the first lecture, that you have to buy one air purifier, you have to buy one water purifier, you have to buy one, you have to buy oxygen cylinders. In between, you have to go to oxygen parlors. So like that, and your lungs capacity is declining. So you have to go to hospitals for many diseases. So so there are different health costs of pollution. But if government provides good public transport system, then people will stop using their individual cars and vehicles, and that's how they will all use the public transport system. But COVID has changed the entire story. Now nobody is going to use public transport in near future. Okay, because everybody will have a fear that I may get the infection from somebody else, and that's why in Odisha also we see that now only 20% of the public transport system is being used now. Many bus operators are not running their buses. So okay, so that was your question basically on the demand, why the demand for the car had fallen. Yeah.
Sir, I have a question on this aggregate demand, sir.
Yes.
Sir?
Yeah, please repeat your question.
Sir, I have a question on this aggregate demand.
Yes.
So that net exports you have said, sir, this is for the demand of outside country and not our country, right?
Yes.
Because should be imports means what we import more, that means that should be our demand.
Yes. But remember, see, there are so many small countries where their domestic demand is very, very less, but their GDP is very big. How that has happened? See, if your domestic demand is less, your GDP cannot be very big, right? Because gross domestic product will be less, and because you cannot produce much. But how those countries, very small countries, have very big GDP? Because they are getting the demand from the foreign countries. That is why that is important. That in that context only we are discussing that the external demand is also important. Okay? And anyway, that I am showing in my next PPT, that what are the factors that will influence the aggregate demand. Okay? So don't get confused with AD means Ambarendra Das. This is AD means aggregate demand. Okay, and so your aggregate demand is influenced by so many other factors, that is interest rate, income and wealth, changes in inflation, expectation, and exchange rate. So here I have written C, I, G, and NX. Remember, in C, that is consumption, consumption has two components. One is autonomous consumption, and other is induced income, induced consumption or income induced consumption. What is this autonomous consumption? Even if your income is zero, your consumption will be positive, because you need to survive. My teacher in the UG class used to tell this, that to keep your body and soul together, you have to eat something, and that's how the consumption demand will be positive even if your income is zero. Okay, so that is autonomous consumption demand. And then other is income induced. Like I was giving the example that when your income is less, you can't gift a diamond set to your spouse, or you cannot gift a car to your parents. But when your income increases, you can do all that. Okay, of course. Similarly, your food habits also. When your income increases, we buy different other products. So we move from the coarse cereals to protein items and to fat items. Our food basket also changes when our income changes. So one component of your consumption is autonomous, that is very basic minimum, and other part is income induced. Then your investment, because C plus I plus G plus NX, that we are discussing. Now investment is a function of the rate of interest, and MEC, that is marginal expectancy of capital. That means rate of interest refers to the cost of investment, and MEC refers to the profit of the investment. So you compare these two things, and accordingly you will do the investment. And if you feel that rate of interest is very high and your profit is going to be low, your investment demands will be less. And why we are adding, see, this is, you must be thinking that consumption is different, investment is different. Why we are saying that it is consumption demand and investment demand? Because both are adding to the employment and income in the economy. If you are demanding more in the economy, then there is consumption demand. So you are addressing the demand side. And if you are looking at the investment, then you are addressing the supply side. That means if you do investment, then income goes to the people, then there will be demand in the market, and that's how there will be growth in the economy. So that's how investment is also demand, consumption demand and investment demand. Then G is autonomous. How will government spend money? No factor will influence. These are all political factors, depending on the ideological position of the government. Then it of course will be determined by the tax revenue of the government. But then we always believe that G is autonomous. Government expenditure is autonomous. We do not know, we cannot predict how government is going to spend money. Then export is a function of the income of the foreign country. So if you are suppose exporting softwares to America, now America will buy your product depending upon their income. Say when there was slowdown in 2008 in America, all our export industry was badly affected. Now after that it became normal and things were improved. Now again COVID has come. Now again our export has been badly affected. So income in the foreign country will affect the export of domestic country. Now our country's income will determine the import, because if you all become rich, then see Odisha's per capita income is about 1,05,000 rupees. Now if you compare the Goa's income, it will be say minimum 5 times or 6 times. Well, if everyone in Odisha becomes a person like Goa or say like a European standard, then we'll all buy luxurious products. We will not be happy with our domestic products. We will also say, no, we only buy or use imported products. Of course, Modi will say that no, this is very bad actually, because you have to talk about you have to use all make in India products. That is an ideological position that you can take. But otherwise, usually when income increases, people will demand all variety of products. You do not buy what your neighbor is using. You buy something so different and something superior to that product. So aggregate demand will be influenced by the interest rate, income and wealth, because I told you that consumption is influenced by income and autonomous part. And exchange rate, change in the inflation rate. Okay, so those factors will influence the aggregate demand. Now the second factor is aggregate supply. Aggregate supply, if you look at the individual product, then see how a supplier supplies a product. Whenever you believe that the prices will be higher, then you will supply more, because higher price will give you higher profit. And other reason is that for producing more quantity, you have to incur more cost, and that is why you will be willing to supply more only if the prices increase. So supply curve will be one upward sloping curve. Now both of these lines are put together here. Now aggregate demands are always downward sloping curves, because when the prices will be higher, your demand will be lower, and when rate of interest is higher, your demand will be lower. Okay, so the aggregate demand curve is always a downward sloping curve, and your aggregate supply curve is one upward sloping curve, but it is not a perfectly linear curve. Rather, it is a non-linear curve. We see that up to a point it slopes upward, and then after that it becomes vertical, and this is short-term supply curve. Why this is happening? Because there is a concept called full employment. Imagine if all the resources are used in their full capacity, then you cannot increase the production beyond the limit. So for example, you are producing some say cement. You are a cement producer, and now you saw that okay, your demand for cement is this much, and you are producing regularly that much cement. So that means you are running in your full capacity. So you are using 8 hours of labor per day, and whatever machinery you have, that you are producing in full capacity. But all of a sudden you felt that now demand for cement has gone up because of say Prime Minister's Awas Yojana, and so now every household is getting income support to construct a house. So now demand for cement has gone up. Now can you produce more cement quickly. You cannot do. Initially, what you can do, you can increase the shift from 1 shift to 2 shift, and to get labor also it will take some time. So, but you can still increase within 1 or 2 months. But again, if you will have to increase further, then what you have to do? You have to change the machinery, because your machinery has a limited capacity. If you are producing 100, say 1 lakh packets per day, even if you are making 3 shifts, then also you'll have to employ labor or managers for 3 shifts. That will take some time. So in short run, you will not be able to increase your production, because there is a concept called full employment. You are running in your full capacity. Now, if at all you have to increase your production, you can shift that full employment capacity to the right side. So the Y star is full employment level of output. So that when you see the supply curve is becoming vertical, that means even if the prices are increasing, you will not be able to increase your production. It's like cement industry. Even if somebody is willing to pay a higher price for a bag of cement, you will not be able to produce, because you have a limited capacity. You will say, no, I cannot produce because I have limited labor, we have limited machinery, so I cannot. But in long term, you can do that. You will go to a bank, you will ask for more money, then you will buy more machinery, and then your full capacity will be expanded to right side. So Y star will shift to right side, and so the supply curve, a great supply curve, will also shift to right side. Okay. So now the intersection points give you the equilibrium point in the economy. That means that whatever has been produced is demanded in the market. So aggregate demand, both domestic demand and external demand, everything to coming together. Now you see that there is an equilibrium point. And remember, this equilibrium here that is shown in this diagram is underemployment equilibrium, because the ideal equilibrium should have happened in the full employment level of output. So the aggregate demand curve should have intersected at this point, okay, where there is full employment, but that is not happening, because our aggregate demand is less than, this is an equilibrium point, but this is less than the full employment equilibrium. So that's, in India now, if you observe, say there is unemployment, because you are not running at full capacity, that means our aggregate demand is still less, and so we are not able to produce more, and in industries there is still excess capacity, and that's how we see there is unemployment in different sectors. Okay, so this is all about the aggregate demand and aggregate supply and the equilibrium in the market. And so in this, we have discussed different other concepts also relating to the present situation. So with this, we shall stop.